Can you guys see the screen or not yet?
I see it.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let me start that. The project is called Impact, which is part of Abundance Protocol. And the idea is really how to solve the problem of public goods at scale. And the approach that I'm taking with this is an ecosystem approach, which is basically we have individuals, companies, which is kind of different structures, um, you know, organization of society, and the ecosystem as a whole. So the problem that we have with public goods is obviously that, these goods, they're hard to, come to coordinate to then produce them at scale. Things like education, healthcare, independent journalism, science, medicine, all these things, we have some that government can advance, but a lot of the things are not really something that we achieve at scale, or when we achieve some parts of it, it's not really sustainable. There's not enough money going to it, or it's just not produced as people hope for. And the approach I'm taking is looking at what works and reverse engineering it for the ecosystem level. So we're going to take a look at kind of individuals, companies, ecosystems. I'm only going to kind of focus on companies at the moment and see what works, why it works for companies to produce goods and to kind of not just produce, but also consume goods. Like, you have uh, office space, or you have kind of commercial goods that are being produced, even though, like, if you think about it, if you want to get from point A to point B, maybe you need to fly there, so someone needs to produce the plane, produce all these components, and you have all these global supply chains that are coordinated scale to produce it, and it works, but you don't have that for something that's kind of curing cancer, let's say. Obviously there are you know uh, you know ways of doing it, but not as a public good. It always has to be some kind of, a pill or something that you can, something scarce that you can sell to people, but not something as like, this research um, solved this problem and there's no kind of scarce thing. Um, so because of that, we're going to look at what works for companies. And the four components that I look at is alignment, agreement, funding, and feedback loops. So alignment really means that everyone within this coordination level, they have the same interests, or their interests basically align. And because of that, they can come together. And if you need to produce something, or uh, you value something, everyone within this structure can agree, yes, we need this, and therefore we can go forward and coordinate around that. Agreement is a bit different from alignment, actually, but agreement is you need some kind of mechanism where this structure, this company or ecosystem, can come together and decide on specific things that they need. So companies, obviously, they have like management, and then you need um, a broader consensus around, yes, we value this, we need to buy this, we need to fund that, we need to produce that. Funding, obviously, same way, like a company would have treasury uh, that they can use to fund. And the feedback loop is really for companies is return on investment. If you know, acquire office space, let's say, you want to make sure that what you pay for actually produces more money down the line, which means that uh, you know more money is coming in than going out, which makes it sustainable. So there's a feedback loop between what you consume and what you produce. At the ecosystem level, we obviously have government as the kind of coordination mechanism, but there's a lot of problems with each of these, like the alignment. For government, there's factionalism, there's politicking, which kind of doesn't align the interests of the populace as a whole with that of the government. And I can kind of go for each of them. What's the problem? For agreement, again, there's crisis of trust in government because there's like conflicts, funding. There is funding for government, but it's not really good for all kinds of public goods, like open source software. You really don't have government funding it in a way that, they cannot do it at scale, and they cannot kind of do it that in a way that benefits people, um, because the feedback loop between what people need and what government sees is it's off balance. Basically, government looks at things every 4 years, let's say, but people need things like constantly. And the feedback loop, again, for government, let's say, is elections. But again, that's a very kind of slow process, so it's not very effective. And the mechanism I'm proposing is really learning what works, and reverse engineering it using blockchains for the ecosystem. And the idea is to take as alignment as a network economy. Basically, if you think of blockchains as an example, people are voluntarily, if you want to buy tokens, buy coins in this network, you know that if there is inflation, basically, if you have to fund, let's say, network security, everyone is aligned around you don't want to, just give out too much because that reduces the value of your token, but you want this network security because otherwise the blockchain doesn't work. So the idea is take this basic concept that works for blockchains and extend it to other public goods. And to do that, we need agreement within the network. And that's what we use. Instead of just consensus mechanism, we use value consensus, which means that there is a certain mechanism where we take domain experts and ecosystem-wide participants that can then decide on, yes, this is how much we value this particular public good. And then you kind of have a broader feedback from the whole ecosystem if there's some kind of issue there, if it's not really valuable. And the funding comes from, just like we have with blockchains, from currency inflation, which again aligns everyone's interests, and also makes sure that what people actually value gets funded, but you don't want to kind of fund too much. You don't want to put too much money toward it because that devalues your everyone's holdings, but you also don't want to undervalue it because you want the network to grow. And if you want the network to grow, you need to fund things adequately. And then the feedback loop is that you only fund things once you see their impact. Once there's impact, then you say, okay, we see their impact was realized, therefore we're going to fund it. So that's really the approach that we're taking. I'm not going to go there into every specific aspect of it, of the mechanism, but there's a white paper out there and so on. But this is kind of the graphic for that. And just one point on the funding mechanism is that if you're familiar with rivalrous versus non-rivalrous and excludable versus non-excludable goods, right now pretty much all the mechanisms we have, other than consensus mechanisms, are non-regenerative in the sense that they take money from the excludable part, which is basically private goods, and in some way they take that money to fund the public goods. The same way government takes taxes, philanthropy, you still kind of get money from the private sector, crowdfunding, same thing. Quadratic funding, it's still like, donations, and even retroactive funding today, the way it's envisioned is to be from sequencer fees, which is still in the private goods kind of sector. But consensus mechanisms, they fund the common good of network security through this inflation, through the mechanism itself. It doesn't come from like other private goods. So value consensus attempts to kind of extend the ability of consensus mechanisms to do it for other public goods. And the way you would visualize it is that you have a network economy, and there's a lot of kind of value already in the economy. And if you say we want this new public good that's going to contribute to the network, you evaluate it based on how much is going to contribute. So if the network is, let's say, has $1 trillion in it, and you're saying this thing is worth $10 billion to the network, when you issue that currency, you expect the network to actually be worth more. So the supply and demand kind of balance out this public good. So you're producing a public good and you can capture its value. That's the idea. And just one last aspect of that is that you're creating an infrastructure for permissionless cooperation, which means that even though you're funding the final public good, there's a lot of other public goods that it most likely depends on. Just like open source software usually depends on, there's a whole bunch of dependencies. So you want to fund everything that goes into producing it based on its relative impact. And what this creates is um, a, co a coordination mechanism that incentivizes everyone to produce things in the open. Because once you produce this thing in the open, when other people build on top of it, they're gonna also help fund this node in this growing tree. And because of that, it incentivizes people to produce public goods, which can create this supply chain for public goods. So that's kind of not sure how much time I took to present this, but that's kind of the idea behind. And let me just stop sharing.
Um, a couple initial thoughts. I mean, overall, I love the thinking and especially sort of reverse engineering the way that you've done it. It seems like a great way to approach the problem. Are you thinking mainly in terms of digital public goods, or do you imagine this bridging into physical or real world public goods? Is maybe one question. And then it seems like the piece of the puzzle that's going to be almost most important is going to be that impact evaluation. And I'm wondering how you're planning to or thinking about tackling that.
Mhm. So the way I'm thinking about it,
No problem. It's okay, pup or person.
yeah, he gets excited when people come in. Yeah, so it's easier to evaluate things that are digital because the data is there, but the idea is to progressively be able to fund any kind of public or common good. So if the network economy is, let's say, a city, people who voluntarily join this network economy, let's say within the city and have coins in this network economy, they value the things that are valuable to them in the city. Whatever it is, clean city, clean streets, healthcare, all those things. Evaluating the impact is something that will improve over time. Um, just because, that's also a public good. So if you're creating a mechanism that improves impact evaluation, that in itself is a public good, which then kind of, the process keeps rolling. So it's gonna start most likely with digital public goods, but progressively will be kind of for the broader, uh, for any kind of good. And another thing is that you don't necessarily need to immediately say this is valuable at this level. You can say, we don't know how valuable it is, but we know that at least it's this much value. And that's already good, better than anything we have at the moment. The mechanisms we have today are not, really adequate at funding things at scale. And if you're saying this is worth $1 million, at least, even though it could be worth 10 billion, at least you have something. And over time, you can still kind of push more money into it as you get better at measuring the impact, and the ecosystem would not be degraded because you're still kind of, that at least this is the impact you're creating. And over time, once as long as you're saying we will always make sure that the impact is rewarded, you kind of creating this retroactive feedback loop that allows the ecosystem to maintain the value of the currency, and people would be interested to continue contributing to it. Does that answer the
Got it.
question or?
I think so. I think so. As it moves out maybe into real world, you imagine this more as like local currencies where there's a local community economy based on a token, and then that token is able to reward the public goods in that community, common goods in this community that are supporting everyone. Um, I think a couple, just knowing that I've got to jump in a couple minutes. One thing to maybe dig into, I don't know if you know Will Ruddick and his work with grassroots economics and commitment pooling. but it feels like there's maybe some interweaving here with their work in terms of the way that they look at valuing different goods in a community and as those being sort of commitments into a larger pool, it feels like there's something there in terms of valuing these public goods maybe in a real world setting. So
Mm.
I fully understand that you probably first and foremost looking at digital public goods because that's a much easier path. And I don't, I think there's a lot of folks that are leaning into there and hoping that then those lessons can bridge out into the real world. But I think as we begin to unlock these systems in the real world, that's where the max impact is really going to happen for
Yeah.
communities at least. But um,
Yeah, I'll take a look. I'm not completely familiar with that, but I will take a look at his work. And yeah, I mean, it is kind of gonna start from small communities, but part of it is we have this concept called super alignment, which is if you're producing a public good and there's a lot of different ecosystems that value it, whoever wants to produce it will suddenly say, wait a minute. So there's like these 10 communities, and they each kind of, this one is gonna pay me 1 million. This one is a small community, but it all adds up. And that's why there's no kind of competition between those ecosystems. There's actually collaboration. That's why we call it like super alignment, because all
yeah,
these ecosystems, they don't try to poach the different people to help them, but rather say, wait a minute, we all want this thing. This is going to be benefit all of us. We're all going to pay what we value. They're not going to undervalue it because they still want this public good. So that's kind of the process, that it's scalable. It can start at a small scale, but it also can kind of grow to a larger scale.
yeah, I think really, really exciting work. I followed just periphery, the abundance protocol and some of the things you've been building, but it was great to learn a little bit more. I dropped Will's Twitter in the chat here, so you might check him out. And I feel like he was maybe Sid probably knows better than I, but I thought he maybe was even in the kernel ecosystem at one point, but I could be wrong. But he's a very welcoming individual to ping. So and feel free to drop me a note in Slack or anywhere else to chat more in the future. But
Sounds good.
sure
Yeah,
some of the other folks on the call maybe have some other feedbacks. But thanks for the presentation, Mike. Appreciate you.
appreciate you. Thank you so much. Any other questions, feedback, anything?
Thanks so much. I think I'm probably not deep enough in Web3 to understand what this does, but do you have another example maybe just to illustrate it a little bit more?
Sure. So an example I was thinking is, let's say you have a community that they want to, let's say, cure a certain disease. And let's say it's a city, and the city says, well, we have a whole bunch of people, and a lot of them um, suffer from this disease, and that kind of affects our economy. And how much is it going to benefit us if we, cure this disease and do it in a way that it's not going to be like, everyone, anyone will be able to benefit from it, in the
Hmm.
sense that it's not going to be, there's not going to be a patent on curing it, but rather it's going to be out in the open, which basically means that kind of everyone can collaborate on this project in the open, which means you do research here, someone else kind of learns from it, and also even if it fails, you don't kind of hide the results, which is what happens a lot in pharmaceuticals. They do their own research, but they have no benefit of kind of presenting their research to others. So here,
Yeah.
everyone is you do the research, and even if it fails, it still contributes because you're providing information on what doesn't work, which is still useful information. And then kind of everyone can build on that, and everyone can kind of do their own, can contribute their own, um, you know, research or whatever it is toward this greater goal. And then once it's realized, once it's actually cured, there is kind of, the cure is there. Um, there's the process of the retroactive funding, which is
Yeah.
basically we see how effective this cure is, and we see how the people react to it, and kind of how many people are actually cured. Maybe it doesn't cure everyone. Let's say it only cures 50% of those affected. So you don't pay the full amount, you pay, let's say, half the amount, and then the money spreads to everyone who contributed based on their contribution. And the economy would, let's say it's $1 trillion economy, as I gave an example before, and this thing is like $1 billion worth. So there's an inflation process. Basically, you distribute more currency worth that 1 billion to everyone who contributed. But since the economy is going to grow in proportion to, those people who are now cured from this disease, you have more demand because the economy grows, and the currency is going to be rebalanced, kind of maintain its value. So that's the idea.
And so you just described it in a retroactive way of funding it. So it would only work retroactively. So the work would already have to be done already, and then you fund people, you reward them in a retroactive way.
Right. And the idea is that you do fund retroactively, and the reason for that is you want to maintain the currency value because you have an ecosystem and you cannot just distribute funds. But the idea is that when you do that, and when people contribute to something, that there is a reward based on, there is a final reward, you can have investment in it. So if you have an approach and you're saying, I'm solving this problem, people can invest in it knowing that there's a payout. And then they take the risk of basically if they, how well they understand this process, how well they think that your solution is correct. But because there's a payout, the process can work. So it's not just like you're working, what's the word for it? Like at risk, because you can get an investment that kind of makes the process actually work.
Yeah, makes sense. Is it in any way related? Do you know the hypercerts protocol?
Yes, I am aware of hypercerts. I mean, I know about hypercerts. The difference is that their approach is trying to create a market for the hypercerts. And here the approach is to create consensus around the value. And the difference is really that the hypercerts approach is still using those two left quadrants, like the private quadrants, instead of the regenerative aspect. So they're still looking for a source of funding, which is basically if there's a government that's willing to pay for it, if there's some kind of institution willing to pay for it, then they can have a market around it. But here the idea is to create this market that can then create the investment loop around it. So that's really the main issue that I think is missing right now in public goods, that there's no value capture. And that's why I believe that ecosystems are the way to capture value. It's voluntary, so no one is. It's not like you have a government that forces you to pay taxes, but rather you join this ecosystem because you believe that what they value, you also value. So if it's a city, you're still not forced to join it. You're part of this kind of subset of people within the city who say, yes, we value this thing, we value curing this thing, we value transportation, whatever it is. And because we value it, we want to participate in this local economy. And we're willing to kind of, to have this inflation process because we know that it can be sustainable.
So the prerequisite is a certain shared identity. Could be place-based, could be a city, could be a tribe, whatever.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
And you can be a part of multiple ecosystems. You can be like a part of a global ecosystem that values a whole bunch of kind of global initiatives. You can have like your local. It could be like an ecosystem just for gaming, let's say, like all the people that just value, improving the technology for playing games, whatever it is. And then they would fund the things that are related to that. And that's the idea that you can have you can be whatever is, let's say, as much money as you have, you can have like 10% in this ecosystem, 20% in that. And that's kind of how you interact with this new architecture.
Okay, pretty cool.
Thank you. Any other questions or anyone else? Am I missing something from the chat? No. And just one thing that I didn't mention is right now I'm building on Farcaster, kind of the social coordination layer to that, which is, it's called Impact. You can find it as a channel on Farcaster or go to impact.abundance.id. And it's really just a very kind of like a pro. It's not even a. It's a proto version of the coordination level for this protocol. And the idea is that you have people creating kind of value within Farcaster. It can be you know just content, but it can also be people building apps on top of it. And if you value those apps, there's like a curation market, which is powered by Impact, and people can curate how much impact they think each project contributes, each project, each article, whatever it is, and then we reward it through tips, which is kind of the first stage. But there's going to be a process to actually create it into an economy that kind of has a closed loop around that.
And this also, I mean, this also goes beyond what Gitcoin is doing and Giveth is doing, because you would probably also say they're only on the left two quadrants in terms of taking money out of the private market and redistributing it, maybe through a cool
Right.
mechanism like quadratic funding or whatever. But in the end, it's just, yeah, okay.
Right. So, I mean, that's kind of, I feel that's like the missing piece. Like, quadratic funding is actually part of this mechanism. I'm not going into like all the details of the mechanism, kind of simplifying it. It's part of the evaluation process of how that's done. It's not quadratic funding, it's actually quadratic voting.
Yeah.
And retroactive funding is also part of it, as I mentioned. But the missing piece is the consensus value, which is without an ecosystem being able to actually value a public good, you're not getting that, you cannot close the loop for the value capture.
Yeah.
Megan, are you trying to, I'm seeing you on and off the, yes, computer's having issues. Oh. Sorry about that. All right, anyone else, anything else? Let me just quickly share just a graphic for the network super alignment.
You currently work in Web3?
Um, I guess. I mean, I'm working on this full time, so I guess that counts.
Oh, very cool.
So the idea of super alignment, which I mentioned earlier, is really if you have like kind of multiple ecosystems and they each value a specific public good, then you have kind of a greater incentive. So the more ecosystems value something, and if you think about it, like if you have Solana and Ethereum and so on, and they all really value, um, you know, let's say decentralization or making the transactions faster, instead of kind of competing with each other on these things, you can actually collaborate on the improvement, and then everyone benefits from it. So that's kind of the idea that we don't have currently. We have kind of open networks that are competing instead of collaborating. So that can change that dynamic. I think this room is going to close in 3 seconds. So thank you, everyone.